This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
This episode is brought to you by Honda. Introducing the all-new, all-terrain Honda Passport Trail Sport, the most off-road capable Honda Passport Honda has ever dreamt up. The Passport features increased ground clearance, roof rails on all trims, and available specially developed all-terrain tires. And you'll stay comfortable with tri-zone climate control and available features like heated and ventilated front seats and a panoramic moonroof. Learn more at honda.com/passport.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today I am going to be talking about how working on your marriage benefits your children and their future relationships in ways that you probably have not thought about. And before that, we will, of course, have to encourage you to subscribe. I don't know who we is. That's the royal we. I am encouraging you to subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was on whether sex to you is more about your self-concept as a good lover than it is about connecting to your wife. And she picks that shit up, so she's not going to want to be in bed with you if it is a performance art for you. And there are about 190 maybe more extra episodes. If you subscribe for only $8.99 a month, you get all of them. So definitely subscribe. And I am on Substack now, so follow me on Substack as well. It's a different vibe on Substack, different vibe on Medium. It's a different vibe everywhere on all the 7,000 different social media platforms that I am on. All right, so if you grow up in a dysfunctional home where your parents, listen, there's all kinds of dysfunctional homes, right? But I'm talking specifically about a dysfunctional home where your parents do not get along. They don't love each other in the way that people do in other families that you encounter, such as your friends' houses or even television, which, as I've said to you guys over and over, television is like normal families. You know, it is like healthy families. It really is. And you could sit with that, and that could be worth the price of admission to this free podcast by itself. When people come from happy, loving families, they're like, oh, that family on TV reminds me of us. Of course, they're going to be better looking and funnier and shit like that, but have a bigger house, whatever. It's just Friends, you know? People were like, oh, how could those people in Friends have all that time to sit around and hang out and have such beautiful apartments in the city on their salaries? But for happy people, they didn't say, oh, how could all those people just be friends? How did they even have each other as friends? No, the part that they thought was unlikely was the monetary value of the apartment or how much leisure time these people had. But if you've had your own friendships that are deep, and if you have a friend group, then you'd be like, oh, that's like me and my friends, except of course we're not as good looking and this and that, whatever. Or we don't have as much money, or we don't have as much leisure time. But the friend group part, you're like, oh yeah, that's the Chandler, I don't even remember the names anymore. That's the Monica, what have you, right? So it's the same kind of thing for when people in happy families look at a television show. They're like, oh yeah, of course, it's not exactly like that. Gilmore Girls. Gilmore Girls, such a good example. People that, where they have a loving relationship with a mother and daughter relationship, they say, oh, it's almost like Gilmore Girls. Me and my mom were saying we're like Gilmore Girls. Right? Whereas people who have an unhappy, disconnected relationship with their mother are like, oh, that shit is crazy. Mothers and daughters don't talk to each other and hang out with each other. Oh my God, could you believe that anybody would lap that up, bunch of suckers? But there are people who identify with this, and they're called people in functional, mutually respectful, loving family units or marriages, right? So the same exact kind of thing with couples. When you see couples on TV, or when you see a movie about a couple, yes, of course, a romantic movie like The Notebook, that it does amplify things. It's like porn, where it's such a good example. I'll really talk about this, and then maybe I'll get back to the main part about your kids in a little bit, but I really want to set things up here. So if you see a romantic movie and you're in a loving marriage, you find commonalities. You're like, oh yeah, like we have like a love story too, and we had ups and downs too, and we connect too, like that, right? Same as porn. If you're very disconnected, this is why, by the way, it's the same as drug use. There's some people who could do coke at a couple parties and they're fine, right? But if you are the sort of person who's an addictive, depressive personality, don't do drugs, right? And certainly don't do drugs. I'm not telling anybody to do drugs, but I'm saying, why can some people drink and become alcoholics and other people just drink casually? Because people are different. And if they are healthier overall, then, they process things differently. So you could process a romantic novel, and if you're in a happy relationship, you're like, oh, that guy's kind of like my husband. That's a little bit like our story. And if you are a guy who watches porn periodically, and that does exist, not that much in my office because people are struggling with their marriages, right? But there are guys who watch porn like, every few weeks. And then they're like, oh, yeah, that's porn, like, cool. And they jerk off, and then that's it. And it doesn't turn into this addictive thing, right? Where they're doing it like multiple times a week and getting down the rabbit hole and comparing it negatively to their wife. They actually think, oh, yeah, that's like some shit we could do. And then they do it with their wives, So don't watch porn. I don't like porn. I don't want drugs. Don't do coke. Don't do porn. Don't do any of the things I just said that some people can do and not, and survive. But the point is the healthier and happier your relationship or family unit is, the more you feel like you fit in with everything in the world, including media, including other people, etc., etc. So it's actually good that I did that long wind up, because it's even more painful to think that if your kids don't see a happy home, then they feel on the outside looking in. They don't understand what it's like to see mom and dad kiss and hug. They don't understand what it's like to be in a happy family that is where the children are like little planets that orbit around the sun of the close and strong relationship of the parents. They think that stuff is like made up, or that they just don't deserve it. And that if you see, like, if you're a girl and you see that your mother does not get love and compliments and affection, and that your father's not attracted to her and they are disconnected, you're like your mother probably. You're a girl, right? Like, that's your female role model. You got something in common with her, being a girl with most of the same DNA, and then you are not going to think that you deserve to find that and to be with a man who really loves you. And if you're a boy, and this goes cross-gender too, like, you could identify with the other parent, but this is just the most normative one that I see all the time, is the person identifying and saying, well, I thought this about my mother, so that's why I learned X about myself, right? If it's a girl, and vice versa if it's a boy. And so a boy sees his father get, let's say, rejected by the mother. And this is dually. It goes, from back and forth. There's dual direction. This is not one person's a villain ever in the way that I convey stories. Hopefully, I've made that very clear. It takes two to tango in every dysfunctional relationship. But anyway, so the boy sees his father, this kind of rejected character who, he can't even imagine his father doing something like coming into the room, giving the mother a big kiss and sweeping her up and hugging her, and that the mother wouldn't like jump out of her skin if that happened, so then he thinks of his father as not a sexually successful man, even though he doesn't, articulate it like that. And so therefore that's your male role model. So how are you going to be successful with the ladies, right? If you see a couple in your house, like did you see a couple in your house? Because a lot of people in dysfunctional families did not. They did not even view their parents as a couple. It was just kind of an unhappy morass. Like, it was like this there wasn't a unit. It felt really disconnected at home, and the parents were not a strong couple. They didn't have couple vibes. You did not think of them as a romantic unit. And if that's what your kids are seeing, it's likely that that's what you saw too, if your kids are seeing it, because as I've said, people pass down the sexless marriage for the exact reason that I'm saying. So then you do not think of yourself as born to people, as sharing DNA with people who are romantically successful. So then how could you have confidence? You end up kind of watching other people like a hawk and trying to piece together a persona that could potentially, be more successful in this domain than your parents. That's very difficult, right? It's very difficult to not learn something at home. It's much easier to have an automatic default. This is what I say to my clients. Give your kids an automatic default, right? Give them a template. Give them a role model for how to be in a successful and happy relationship. You are that person. You are those people. There is nothing else that they can do. How much money would you pay for a course for your child to learn how to be in a loving, respectful, affectionate, connecting marriage? You would pay a lot of money. Well, that should be your couples counseling budget. That was some meme that I made that I was proud of, because it's true, right? You would spend so much money to give them a higher likelihood of being in a happy, close marriage where they give and receive love freely. And then the best way for you to ensure, or at least make it a lot likelier, that they would be attracted to such a dynamic and believe themselves deserving of and capable of such a dynamic would be for them to be emulating what they saw every day as a child. Of course, that's easier said than done, but it can be hugely motivating to get yourself into couples counseling. Or if your relationship isn't working, you've been to years of couples counseling, then think about it. What are you teaching your children by staying in a conflictual, disconnected, cold, and tense relationship? And honestly, if you're fighting, they hear you. I've talked about this so much, but never hurts to say it more. The kids hear you if you're fighting. They know. Just like if your parents were fighting. Now, in terms of the people who are just in this cold détente, where there's no affection, there's no, of course, sex, there's no romance, but they don't fight, then they say, well, we're teaching the kids how to function as a family unit. But you're not teaching them how to function as a couple. A boy who is raised by a father who can't, kiss his wife, who can't, cuddle his wife, how do you think he's going to have the balls, no pun intended, because this is literally how you would procreate, but how would he have the courage to consider himself as a sexually viable man? The same with a woman. If, as I said before, I hear this all the time of women who identify with their mothers. The mother had low self-esteem. The daughter looks like the mother. She acts like the mother. She's the mother's daughter. So then she has low self-esteem because her mother and her father, their relationship conveyed that the mother was not able to get a man who really loved her. The man didn't really love her. And then the girl associates that with, well, he must not have really loved her because she's not lovable. And if I'm like her, I'm not lovable. And this is never articulated, until years later in therapy. These are cognitions that are below the level of consciousness, but that are the template for how you engage in the world, the risks that you take, And talking to somebody of the opposite gender is a risk. I'm not talking about cocaine again. I'm talking about the risks that you take, the small interpersonal risks. They are based on your perception of yourself and your confidence in yourself that you are a viable entity romantically and sexually. And if you don't think that you are, because you're not emulating anything at home, then it's going to be a lot harder for you. And then your kids will probably end up in whatever kind of marital dynamic you have. So anywho, the TLDR on this one is that you need to work on yourself in individual therapy, certainly if you're in an unhappy marriage, but also couples counseling. Even if your kids just know that you're in couples counseling. Some people don't tell their kids that they're in couples counseling. And I'm like, okay, so what? Let's just play this one out, right? So you're in couples counseling. They're like, well, we don't want to worry the children. So okay. So you're in couples counseling. So you're in marital distress. So you obviously have a potential of potentially getting divorced. Would you rather them be completely blindsided? And if therapy works, which, by the way, something like over 90% of people that were surveyed by the marital and family therapist, AAMFT, I'm not an MFT, so I don't know, American Association for Marital and Family Therapists, they sent out surveys to people who did go to couples counseling, and most people think it's very useful and impactful. I was actually surprised by the number of people who thought it was successful for them. Like 70% of people rated it like very effective or highly effective, and like 90 said it was effective. I mean, that's pretty cool, you know? I mean, therapy's getting more and more popular. It used to be like you just were on the precipice of divorce. You call like the divorce lawyer and the therapist like in the same hour. But the point being, if you're in couples counseling and things improve, well, then they know that like you valued the marriage enough to reach out and get help if they ever need help. If they're struggling with depression, anxiety, eating issues, whatever, then they're more likely to go to the college counseling center because you have really lived into your value of seeking help and you were open about it. So like, I never think it's bad to tell that to the kids. It also makes you seem more like a couple who cares about each other and the fate of your marriage. Whereas the children might think that you're just so disconnected, you don't even give a shit. So anyway, I mean, that's could be its own podcast, although honestly, I said my piece, so probably not. But you should tell your kids if you're in therapy or counseling or couples counseling, because it is really good role modeling that you are able to show up, say when you need help, accept help, and also in a worst case scenario, if you do get divorced, it is a lot easier for the kids if they're not completely blindsided. All right, well, I think that this was a useful pep talk, hopefully for some, to understand that your children are watching everything you do. And a big, big part of kids' self-concept is, of course, evolutionarily, is whether they can procreate, whether they can be accepted by another person into a loving sexual union one day. You know, I don't care if your kids are a year and a half old. That is what they will eventually, if they are like most people, the large majority of people are not asexual, they're not aromantic, and they very much value getting into a relationship with another human being that considers them attractive, appealing, and lovable. And if they do not see parents that consider each other to be attractive, appealing, and lovable, how the hell are they going to have the confidence to think of themselves as somebody who deserves that, somebody who's able to give that? Literally, people struggle with literally, how do I kiss my wife? For real. I mean, this is for real. People say, how do I put my arms around my wife? How do I initiate kissing my wife? And every single time that anybody's ever asked me anything like that, or people ask, how do you cuddle? You say, Dr. Psych Mom, that we should cuddle. How do people cuddle? What does it physically look like to cuddle? And every single time, what did they see growing up? An extremely disconnected, unhappy home. Literally, it's the same thing. If you don't know how to clean your dishes, it's because you never saw anybody clean their dishes. And if you don't know how to give somebody a kiss, you didn't see anybody give anybody a kiss. So it could give you so much motivation to work on this and give your kids one less thing on their plate one day so that they have an automatic default, an innate template of what a happy marriage with two people who love each other looks like. All right. Thanks for listening, y'all.